The Avatar Chronicles 1, Return of the Avatar, Episode 4. Chapter 3, A Beginning and an End. The Harridan Forest. That same evening. Having spent the rest of the day traversing Falura Field, our band of heroes decided to set up camp for the night in the Harridan Forest. It was a clear and starry night. Gabriel, Carlin, Nystal and Theodric sat around a roaring fire as they washed down the last of their evening meal with mugs of Fire Mountain ale.
Nystal, that was the finest seafood dinner I've had in a long time,
remarked Gabriel.
I never would have guessed that you'd be such a fine cook.
One of my many skills I picked up in my travels, Avatar,
replied Nystal.
Broiled fish, sourdough biscuits, and corn on the cob slathered in creamy butter. That brings back some fond childhood memories. My father used to cook that exact same meal for me when we spent the day fishing at our summer cabin up in Lake George, New York, said Gabriel.
You will find that many of the foods you enjoyed on Earth are available here in New Britannia as well,
remarked Nystal.
Lord British and those who preceded you brought seeds and knowledge of growing crops with them from Earth. Surprisingly enough, these crops have thrived in New Britannia's acidic soil.
Master Nystal, I did not realize that colorful fish we had for dinner,
said Theodric.
It has a surprisingly sweet flavor to it, and I feel more energized.
Ah, my boy, that's because it's magic glowfish,
answered Nystal.
Rarely ever seen, it provides a substantial boost to one's health and mana when properly prepared and consumed. Improper preparation prior to consumption results in violent convulsions and death.
What?
cried Gabriel, Carlin, and Theodric as they all suddenly stood up.
Don't worry, boys. I've been doing this for years. You're in no danger,
assured Nystal. A relieved Gabriel, Carlin, and Theodric sat down.
Nystal, what can you tell me about the Dragon Lords?
asked Gabriel.
Interested in learning about your heritage, Avatar?
replied Nystal.
I believe Theodric would be better suited to tell you the tale.
Theodric nodded and began recounting the story of Christopher and Kuroseth, as outlined in the Book of Aramis. 200 years ago, Christopher Dane paused for a moment on the rocky mountainside to catch his breath. His backpack was beginning to wear heavily on him. It was high noon on a warm summer day, and he had spent the last hour searching the area for the rare hecamum plant, a key ingredient in the powerful healing potion he was developing. He found it hard to believe that it had been 3 years since he had moved to the nearby village of Draven with his lovely wife Katherine and his young son Michael, and set up shop as a village healer. A former member of Lord British's elite Valsen Guard, he had witnessed the horrors of war, and when his term of service was over, he was eager to leave that life behind him. His choice for his new career would have greatly disappointed his late father, the great General Marcus Dane, hero of the Drakata Wars, for their family had a long tradition of distinguished military service stretching back 500 years to the days of Old Britannia. But Christopher had been fascinated by the medicinal properties of plants since he was a child, and he knew this was his calling. The village of Draven, situated near the base of Mount Helath, was a farming community, well known for its wheat and corn. A primary food supplier to the Royal Army, its citizens eagerly awaited the monthly army supply caravan from the capital, Brittany. Draven was quiet and peaceful, and full of friendly people, an ideal place to raise a family. But all that changed a week ago, when farmers noticed their livestock started disappearing, and their fields were set afire late at night. No one dared to venture out at night to investigate. All they could hear was the flapping of wings and loud roaring. The village elders speculated it was the work of the legendary black dragon Kuroseth, who was said to dwell in a cave deep beneath Mount Helath, a rider had been dispatched to Brittany to seek the aid of Lord British, but the rider's charred remains were found early the next day on the eastern bank of the nearby Serpent River. The villagers grew fearful. All hope seemed lost. 3 nights ago, a band of mercenaries known as the Red Wolves entered the Golden Falcon Tavern and offered their services to the village elders at a reasonable price, of course. Their leader, Corwin Longwood, was a former commander in Lord British's Royal Army. He assured the village elders that he and his men had the skills and firepower necessary to take down the legendary Black Dragon, Kuroseth. The Red Wolves had ventured forth towards Mount Helath over a day ago and had not been heard from since. Christopher knew the risk he was taking by being here, but he knew that it was well worth it. He had already gathered all of the other components needed to concoct the healing potion. The hecamum was the final ingredient. If Christopher was right, this new formulation would be 10 times more potent than anything currently available. It could save many lives. Christopher shouted with delight as he spotted a small yellow and purple hecamum plant growing out of a mountain crevice. He carefully plucked 3 of the flowers and placed them in his belt pouch. Suddenly, Christopher sensed that someone was in great pain, one of the several empathic abilities which he had inherited from his mother, and heard an elderly male voice in his mind beg him,
"Please help me."
The voice guided him across the mountainside, and when Christopher rounded a corner, he was surprised to see the legendary Black Dragon, Kuroseth, lying on his back, with a huge gaping wound in his chest. Green pus oozed from the wound, a clear indication that he had been poisoned. Kuroseth's breathing was laboured and shallow. The charred remains of Corwin Longwood and his band of mercenaries lay in front of him.
"I know how this appears, but the truth is, I was forced to slay these mercenaries in self-defense,"
said Kuroseth.
"They attacked me without warning as I was flying back to my lair. I am not the creature who has been terrorizing your village."
"I know,"
replied Christopher.
"I sense the good within you. You appear to be critically wounded. How can I be of assistance?"
"The poisoned weapons which the mercenaries used prevent me from using my magic to heal myself,"
said Kuroseth.
"Are you a mage by any chance?"
"No, I'm only a humble village healer,"
answered Christopher.
"But I will try my best to aid you."
Christopher sat down next to Kuroseth and removed his backpack. He opened it and took out a mortar and pestle. From his various belt pouches he removed the individual ingredients and began combining them together. After half an hour, the healing potion was ready. He poured the bitter concoction down Kuroseth's throat and waited. After 2 hours, Christopher fell asleep. When Christopher awoke, the sun was beginning to set. He was astonished to see Kuroseth sitting upright, fully healed, and staring right at him.
"I owe you my life, Christopher Dane,"
said Kuroseth.
"From this moment on, I am bound to your bloodline for the rest of my days."
"That really is not necessary, mighty Kuroseth,"
replied Christopher.
"I was merely fulfilling my duties as a healer."
"No, I believe all this was meant to be,"
answered Kuroseth.
"Now that I am fully healed and have access to my prophetic powers, I can see now that you have a great destiny before you. Behold,"
said Kuroseth as he gestured with his claws and uttered an incantation. Suddenly, Christopher found himself clad in black plate armour at the head of a long rectangular table in the main council chamber of Castle Jannar. 8 other armour-clad knights, 5 male and 3 female, were seated at the table, staring right at him. "So, Grandmaster, what do you think is our best course of action?" asked a young blue armoured knight. seated to his right.
Pardon me?
Asked Christopher.
King Oswin's invading army is approaching from the east,
said Gero Orasi.
General Cowding's army has just departed from Brittany, but won't reach the border town of Arden for another 3 days. Thousands will be slaughtered.
No, we will buy General Caldane's army time to reach Arden by intercepting King Oswin's army here at Blood Canyon.
Christopher heard himself saying, as he pointed to a spot on the map stretched out on the table.
If we depart now, we should arrive there in about 8 hours,
said Christopher.
If we split our force in half and attack from both the northern and the southern ends of the narrow, high-walled canyon, we should be able to trap King Oswin's troops. I will lead the northern squad consisting of myself, Geezer, Plimico, Marisol, and Duncan. Gero will lead the southern squad consisting of himself, Senga, Connor, and Siobhan.
A brilliant strategy, Grandmaster,
said the beautiful young red-haired, green-eyed, white armour-clad Dragon Lord Siobhan, who gazed at Christopher longingly. All of the Dragon Lords stood up and raised their swords.
Whenever we are needed, the Dragon Lords stand ready to defend you with tenure. Long may Lord British reign!
They shouted. The Dragon Lords rushed out to the rooftop, where their mounts, the 9 legendary dragons, were waiting for them. As Christopher approached Kuroseth, he noticed that the old black dragon was smiling at him.
What's so amusing, old friend?
Asked Christopher.
Time for you to return,
said Kuroseth, as he gestured with his claws and uttered an incantation.
What was that?
Said Christopher, as he found himself back on Mount Helop, standing next to Kuroseth.
That was your future.
Answered Kuroseth.
From this moment on, you are Christopher Nightshadow, the first Dragon Lord. You are destined to lead the 9 Dragon Lords in their defense of New Britannia, as Lord British commands.
But I am no longer a man of war,
said Christopher.
I only seek to ease people's suffering.
You cannot escape your destiny, Lord Nightshadow,
replied Kuroseth.
Failure to take up arms will result in this.
This time, Christopher found himself standing in the middle of his village late at night. Houses were burning as a kobold army swept through. He saw his wife struggling with a lecherous kobold. She stabbed him in the shoulder with a long kitchen knife. The kobold roared in pain and snapped her neck. Her lifeless body fell to the ground. His son cried out, but he was dragged away by another kobold and thrown in a caged wagon with other children. The kobold eyed the children hungrily before he drove the wagon away. The dead bodies of Christopher's close friends and neighbours were strewn all about. It was a horrible sight, and Christopher closed his eyes. When Christopher reopened them, everything was back to normal.
You can only prevent that from happening by embracing your destiny,
said Kuroseth.
What must I do?
Asked a shaken Christopher.
Put on this enchanted black plate armor and this dragon katana,
commanded Kuroseth, pointing to where they lay nearby. When Christopher had done so, he asked Kuroseth,
What next?
Now we find out who has really been terrorizing your village,
said Kuroseth.
Where did they find the rider's body?
On the east bank of the Serpent River,
replied Christopher.
Then let us investigate. Put this saddle on my neck and climb aboard,
said Kuroseth.
Wait a minute.
Interrupted Gabriel.
You're not telling me that this armor and sword once belonged to my grandfather?
Yes, that is indeed the same suit of armor worn by your grandfather 200 years ago,
answered Nystal.
The original dragon katana was destroyed in a battle long ago. The Sword of Virtue has merely reshaped itself in its image because that is what you subconsciously desired, Avatar.
The adventurers listened intently as the tale continued. As Christopher and Kuroseth flew over the Serpent River, the water started bubbling, and a giant, winged, red demon emerged from its depths and soared up into the sky. The demon paused in mid-air and began hurling red fireballs at Christopher and Kuroseth. Kuroseth deftly avoided the fireballs and charged straight at the demon, breathing black fireballs. The demon dodged the black fireballs and returned fire. Kuroseth zigzagged to avoid the demon's fireballs and said to Christopher,
When we get close to the demon, jump onto its neck and stab him in the brain with your sword. It's his only weak spot.
And what happens when he begins to fall?
Asked Christopher.
Don't worry, I'll circle back around to catch you when you jump off him,
replied Kuroseth.
Okay,
said a wary Christopher. Kuroseth flew close to the demon, who suddenly summoned a massive flaming sword and began swinging it at Kuroseth. Kuroseth dodged the sword attacks and then yelled,
Now!
Christopher leapt onto the demon's neck and drew his dragon katana. Plunging it deep into the demon's skull, he pulled it straight down his neck and spinal column. The demon roared out in pain. Christopher quickly sheathed his dragon katana as the demon's eyes turned white and its lifeless form began falling. Christopher jumped and fell a short distance before landing right in the saddle as Kuroseth swooped in to catch him. The demon's body crashed into the river with a loud boom as the cheering villagers, who had heard all of the loud noise and come out of their homes to observe the entire battle in the sky, greeted Christopher and Kuroseth as they landed nearby. Christopher explained to the villagers that the demon was the true culprit, and Kuroseth was a friend. Christopher's wife, Katherine, and his 5-year-old son, Michael, came running. Christopher hugged them both. Michael walked over to Kuroseth and patted him on the nose. Kuroseth smiled. Meanwhile, on a nearby hilltop, 2 figures observed the people below, unnoticed. The young dark-haired man in red and black armour knelt before his master and spoke.
Master, forgive me,
said Lord Shadowreign.
Your plan has failed due to my incompetence. I await your judgment.
Rise, Lord Shadowreign,
commanded the black-cloaked figure.
This was merely a test of your abilities. You have done well. Only a skilled practitioner of the dark arts would have been able to free such a powerful demon lord from his underworld prison and compel him to terrorize this village. The demon's attacks on the other 2 farming villages, Gun and Holcroft, were quite successful.
This dragon lord must be dealt with right away, before he becomes a bigger threat to your plans,
urged Lord Shadowreign.
Should I take care of him personally?
No, Shadowreign,
replied his master.
You must learn the importance of patience. Those who rush into battle are doomed to fail. Powerful you may be, but much you still have to learn, my young apprentice. If this dragon lord becomes a greater threat in the future, rest assured that he will be dealt with.
Yes, Master Shulnir,
said Lord Shadowreign. The cloaked figure uttered an incantation, and both figures vanished in a cloud of black smoke.
So, Lord Shadowreign was indirectly responsible for the rise of the Dragon Lords?
Asked Gabriel.
Yes,
answered Nystal.
But he was also the one responsible for their destruction and your father's exile to Earth 50 years ago. But that's a tale for another evening. Now it's time for us to clean up and get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. We will pass through the Vale of Fallen Heroes, the halfway point to the fortress of the Cobalt King, Ugrod, in the northwest Novia, where the first fragment of the Amulet of Vezur lies.
Nystal, I do have a question,
asked Gabriel.
Whatever happened to my grandmother? Does she still live?
Nystal smiled.
Your grandmother still lives, Gabriel,
replied Nystal.
Would you like to meet her?
Yes, very much so,
said Gabriel.
Does she live far from here?
No. As a matter of fact, she lives very close by,
answered Nystal.
I will take you to her.
Carlin and I will clean up the camp and get some sleep,
said Theodric.
See you both in the morning.
Nystal led Gabriel down a narrow path through the woods to a small stone cottage in a clearing. A cloud of smoke rose from the chimney, and a lamp shone through one of the windows. There was a small vegetable garden located on the right-hand side of the cottage. Well-manicured shrubs lined the stone walk path leading up to the front door. Nystal and Gabriel passed through the nearly invisible dome-shaped mystical force field surrounding the area around the cottage. Nystal explained to Gabriel that he had erected the force field when his grandmother had moved into the cottage following the death of his grandfather. Nystal noted that only good beings with honourable intentions could pass through the impenetrable force field. Nystal knocked on the wooden door.
"Who is it?"
asked a female voice.
"It's Nystal. Katherine, I have someone I want you to meet,"
said Nystal.
"At this late hour?"
answered Katherine.
Oh, all right."
The door opened, and there stood a blonde-haired woman who appeared to be about 60 Earth years old.
"Katherine, this is your grandson, Gabriel,"
said Nystal. Tears welled up in Katherine's eyes as she rushed forward to embrace Gabriel.
"Oh, I never thought I'd live long enough to meet you,"
said Katherine as she stood back and examined Gabriel.
"Oh, you look so much like your father Michael at the same age. Oh, come in. I'll fix us some nice herbal tea. We have so much to talk about."
Gabriel asked,
Nystal, you won't be joining us?
"No, Gabriel. This is between you and your grandmother,"
replied Nystal.
"I trust you can find your way back to camp."
Yes,
replied Gabriel.
I cannot thank you enough for uniting me with my grandmother. See you in the morning.
Nystal smiled, then turned and departed. As Gabriel entered his grandmother's cottage, he realized how lost he had felt ever since his wife Shannon died 3 years ago. But now he had something worth fighting for, something worth living for. Gabriel Nightshadow had finally found his way home. 4 hours later, Nystal heard a noise and woke up. He was startled to see Theodric and Carlin bound and gagged, with 2 burly German guys standing guard over them.
"Don't try anything or we will kill your friends,"
said Hans, pointing his sword at Theodric's throat.
"What's the matter? Are you a scared little boy?"
Theodric appeared to be very nervous and was sweating profusely. Hans laughed in Theodric's face.
"A slow and painful death, to be sure,"
said Gunther, who was throwing knives around Carlin's head. Carlin glared at Gunther and appeared to be cursing him, but the gag muffled his voice, and it was hard to tell exactly what he was saying.
"Yeah, we mean business,"
said Hans.
"We are the Arenstorff brothers, and we are 2 wild and dangerous guys."
"Ah, you finally woke up,"
said a very familiar voice. Nystal turned around to see the tall albino man standing there, with a 10-year-old version of his beloved Chariya in front of him. He had his hands on her shoulders, and she seemed very scared. The adult Chariya realized that the little girl was her when she was a child, and whispered to Nystal, "How is this possible?"
"Parallel worlds, my dear,"
Nystal whispered.
"There's a version of you on each one of them."
"Such a pretty little girl,"
said the tall albino man, stroking young Chariya's cheek with his right hand.
"No doubt she will grow up to be a beautiful woman. I can see why she caught your eye."
"Let the girl go,"
shouted Nystal.
"This doesn't concern her. This is between you and me."
"Of course this concerns her,"
said the tall albino man, with a wicked smile on his face.
"She's the only one you love, no matter what form she's in."
"I don't understand,"
said young Chariya.
"I'm scared. I wish Amber was here."
As if on cue, Gunther suddenly fell to the ground dead, his throat slit by Amber Raine, who had snuck up behind him. Hans was tackled from behind by Moritura, who then proceeded to rip his throat out.
"What's this?"
shouted the tall albino man.
"Let the girl go,"
yelled Amber, as she dropped her dagger and pulled out her twin swords.
"Not so fast,"
said the tall albino man, as he pushed young Chariya to one side and surrounded her with an energy bubble.
One step closer and I will remove all the air from the bubble and young Chariya will suffocate to death.
Nystal waved Amber off with his left hand and said,
Stay back, Amber. Tend to Carlin and Theodric. I'll deal with our foe here.
Turning to the tall albino man, Nystal said,
Time for us to settle this once and for all, on the astral plane.
Agreed,
said the tall albino man.
A mental battle to the death.
Nystal nodded in agreement.
Since you're the one who challenged me, I get to select our battlefield,
said Nystal.
Very well, Nystal,
replied the tall albino man.
What shall it be?
Why, feudal Japan, of course,
said a smiling Nystal.
See you there.
Death is coming for you, Nystal,
shouted the tall albino man. To the others gathered, it appeared as if both Nystal and the tall albino man had suddenly become frozen in time. But on the astral plane, the battle was about to begin. Nystal and the tall albino man found themselves standing in a courtyard of a feudal Japanese estate. It was high noon, and all was silent. Both Nystal and the tall albino man were clad in samurai armour. Nystal's armour was gold in colour, while the tall albino man's armour was black. Nystal found himself full of energy, for in this realm he was young Time Lord once again, and he wielded the gold dragon katana. The tall albino man was wielding a giant red basento, a spear-like weapon with a blade at the end that resembles a scimitar. The two men started circling each other.
I understand that you trained under the great Miyamoto Musashi himself,
said the tall albino man.
Most impressive. Too bad for you I trained under Hattori Hanzo.
The tall albino man attacked first, and drew first blood as his basento grazed Nystal's side. The longer reach of the basento was a real problem, Nystal thought to himself. If I'm not careful, I'm a dead man. Nystal drew blood next as he avoided the tall albino man's thrust and sliced his right shoulder.
Good. Very good,
said the tall albino man.
Let's make this more interesting.
The tall albino man gestured, and suddenly an hourglass appeared in midair.
This hourglass actually runs out in 5 minutes. That's how long you have to kill me before young Chariya runs out of air and suffocates to death,
said the tall albino man with an evil smile.
Are you up to the task?
Damn you,
yelled an angry Nystal as he charged at the tall albino man. The tall albino man deflected Nystal's blow with his basento and laughed.
Yes, give in to your anger,
said the tall albino man.
For that is the true source of one's strength.
Back in the real world, Amber, Raine, Carlin, and Theodric suddenly saw a 5-minute hourglass suspended in midair, and could see that young Chariya was having trouble breathing.
We must penetrate the energy bubble before Chariya suffocates,
yelled Amber. Despite their best efforts, none of their weapons had any effect on the energy bubble, and they could only watch helplessly as young Chariya slowly suffocated. As the final minute began winding down, both Nystal and the tall albino man were badly wounded, and the dirt courtyard was covered in their blood. The two men were breathing heavily. The tall albino man lunged at Nystal with his basento. Nystal closed his eyes, cleared his mind, and then thrust his katana. Both Nystal and the tall albino man dealt each other a fatal blow. Nystal's blade pierced the tall albino man's heart, while the tall albino man's basento impaled Nystal through his stomach. Both of the men fell backward.
You're too late, Nystal,
laughed the tall albino man.
Time has run out. Your sacrifice was for nothing. I win. I'll see you in hell.
Then the tall albino man died, his eyes staring straight upward.
No,
said Nystal as he lost consciousness. In the real world, Amber, Carlin, and Theodric were unable to revive Chariya. After the energy bubble collapsed, Carlin checked her pulse.
I'm afraid she's dead, Amber,
he said. Amber started crying.
I failed her.
Amber sobbed. Theodric suddenly cried out as he noticed Nystal's body beginning to glow. Gabriel suddenly appeared out of nowhere.
Amber, grab the Radazan mind cube from Nystal's pouch,
he said. Amber ran over and grabbed the cube.
What do I do with it?
She asked.
When I give you the signal, place it on young Chariya's forehead,
said Gabriel, as he took hold of young Chariya's lifeless hand, and his green eyes suddenly turned bright white. Suddenly, both Gabriel and young Chariya were surrounded by a white glow.
Now,
said Gabriel, as he concentrated on reviving young Chariya. Amber placed the Radazan mind cube on young Chariya's forehead and held it in place. The white glow surrounding Gabriel and young Chariya grew in intensity, while Nystal's form, which was now completely obscured by a yellow glow, started shrinking. After several minutes, Gabriel let go of young Chariya's hand and collapsed from exhaustion. His eyes returned to their normal emerald green colour. The Radazan mind cube was now pitch black and lifeless.
Did it work?
Gabriel asked, as he breathed heavily. Young Chariya opened her eyes.
I'm alive?
Asked Chariya, as she felt her face.
After 200 years, I finally have a body again.
Yes, my love, and so have I,
said a young male voice from behind them. Everyone turned around to see a bald, 10-year-old version of Time Lord standing there. Turning to Gabriel, young Time Lord asked,
How did you know?
Gabriel pulled out a paperback copy of the last novel in his Time Lord series, Death of a Time Lord, out of his pouch.
Because that's exactly how it happened in the dream I had when I was writing the ending to this book 9 years ago. Strange, though. I never would have guessed that those dreams would turn out to be visions of the future, replied Gabriel.
Amber looked very sad.
Nystal, Chariya, I'm happy for the both of you. But does this mean that the young Chariya I grew to care for is truly gone forever?
Asked Amber.
Amber, I'm so sorry,
said young Time Lord.
Don't be sad, Amber. Young Chariya's soul will eventually be reborn into a new body, and you will see her again one day,
said a smiling Gabriel.
How do you know that?
Asked Amber.
Here, let me show you another vision I had of the future,
said Gabriel, as he touched the tip of his finger to Amber's forehead. Suddenly, Amber found herself at some point in the future. She was standing in a large church. Her pet wolf, Moritura, was standing by her side. She no longer wore armor or carried weapons, for she was now the high priestess of the Church of Chaos. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her chaos spoon. A handsome, bearded man, clad in a white silk robe with blue trim covered in strange golden runes, walked over and gave her a hug. Amber instantly knew that he was her husband, the noted historian, Theodric. She heard a familiar voice call out, "Mommy," and saw young Chariya come running over to hug her as well. All was well, and Amber was very happy. Then, everything turned bright white, and she found herself back in the present.
Oh, was that really my future?
Asked Amber.
It is if you continue on your current path,
said Gabriel. A nervous Theodric walked over and introduced himself to Amber. Amber was stunned to hear about the vision he had 4 years ago on Mount Crendor. Young Time Lord suddenly spoke up.
As happy as I am about how things turned out,
he said,
we have much work to do. We must recover the 9 fragments of the Amulet of Azure before Lord Shadowreign returns in 6 months with his invasion force. Who's with me?
Young Time Lord placed his hand out. Everyone else placed their hands on top of his. "We're with you, Time Lord," everyone shouted. "To save New Britannia. Long may Lord British reign." The beginning. Epilogue. A distant universe on the planet Naguriyama. Lightning pierced the dark night sky over the massive steel citadel. Thousands of armour-clad skeletons littered the rocky terrain outside. In the dimly lit throne room, a figure clad in black armour sat, deep in thought. Suddenly, a cyborg warrior, clad in high-tech samurai armour, entered and knelt before his master.
"Sorry to disturb you, my lord, but it is urgent that I speak to you,"
said the samurai.
"What concerns you, General Ruko?"
asked the dark figure.
"The men grow impatient, my lord. They are eager to invade New Britannia and put the renegade Nystal on trial for his crimes against the Jinrazi Empire," replied General Ruko.
I see,
said the dark figure.
"Tell your men that they need to be patient just a little longer. With my aid, your people have been able to track down and eliminate most of the old gods and destroy their floating city of Gadara. Do not worry. The criminal Nystal isn't going anywhere. In 6 months, we will be able to pass through the Lunar Rift. Once we have defeated Lord British's forces, the Jinrazi will be able to settle on the eastern continent, and Nystal will be brought to justice. I promise you, the late Emperor Kuzai and the Jinrazi Empire will be avenged."
"The Jinrazi thank you for saving us when our battle cruiser crashed on this planet long ago, Lord Shadowreign,"
said General Ruko.
"I will convey your message to the troops."
General Ruko rose, turned, and left the throne room. After General Ruko departed, Lord Shadowreign talked to himself.
"Soon, I will finally be rid of you, Nystal, and then nothing will stop me from reclaiming the throne from my weak and pathetic brother, Lord British. In the end, chaos will triumph over order!"
Lord Shadowreign's eyes glowed bright red as he pounded his right fist down on the stone throne armrest, causing it to shatter into many pieces. Don't go away. There's more happening after the credits. Sir Stile Teckel presents The Avatar Chronicles 1, Return of the Avatar. Directed and produced by Lord Baldrith. Writer and music supervisor, Gabriel Nightshadow. Casting director and court jester, Time Lord. Assistant casting director and director of public relations, Raine. Cast: Lord Baldrith as Nystal, Lord Baldrith, Mingo, and General Ruko. Asclepius as Lord DarkStarr, Red Badger, Kuroseth, Malgor the Mighty, Demon Lord Argax, Henry, Morgan, Brian, and Group. Joe Garrity as Gabriel Nightshadow. Raine as young and adult Chariya and Raine. Carlin Archer as Carlin. StaticGrazer as Lord Shadowreign. Avatar Acid as Theodric. Dame Laurie as Jessica and Katherine. Cammy as Sister Agnes and Lareth. Sir Cabirus as Hands and Gunther. Lacrobat as Master Jonier, Sir Charles Campbell, Enemy Soldier, and Group. Chips 36 as Marek, Teenage Boy, and Group. Elizabeth as Dragon Lord Siobhan, Sarah, and Group. Thornrage as Dragon Lord Jero Orachi and Robert. Brian D. Taylor as Enemy Commander. David Peters as Guard Bob. Lord Trenick as the Tall Albino Man. Marjoria 70 as Vastra. Duke Gregor as Duke Garin and the original Avatar. Dwalin Brushberg as Christopher Nightshadow. Little Geek Lost as Fire Lotus. Sarge as Marius. Brian Manown as Samuel. Sir Stile Teckel as the Mayor of Ardoris. Indy Martin as Lantherthel and Anise. Stephen J. Goldman as John, with Cypher Ismad as Lord British and Barak of the Old Gods. and starring Asclepius as the Great Story Weaver. Duke Garen's Castle. As Lord DarkStarr stood atop the castle wall next to Duke Garen, observing the troops training in the courtyard below, he suddenly had a vision. He was surrounded by mist. The mist dissipated, and Lord DarkStarr found himself sitting in the front row of a giant cathedral. The bright sun shone through the magnificent stained glass windows, which depicted the story of Lord DarkStarr's resurrection and rise to power. The church pews were fully packed, and many people were standing in the back. A beautiful red-headed elf wearing a black robe was standing at the pulpit preaching the word of chaos. Lord DarkStarr was mesmerized by the sound of her voice. When she finished her sermon, Lord DarkStarr found himself at the head of the long line of parishioners waiting to greet her. He walked up to her and said,
"That was a lovely sermon you gave today, High Priestess Amber Raine."
High Priestess Amber Raine replied,
Thank you, my lord. We all strive to follow the path you have set us on. I thought that you should know that many of my parishioners have praised your good work. Since you became ruler, New Britannia has enjoyed a new age of prosperity.
After giving Amber an amorous glance, Lord DarkStarr whispered in her ear,
"I trust that you'll be stopping by this evening for dinner at the usual time. We still have plenty of meat pie left."
I wouldn't miss it for the world, my lord,
replied High Priestess Amber Raine as she smiled. Everything suddenly faded into the mist, and Lord DarkStarr found himself back on the castle wall.
"Are you all right, Lord DarkStarr?"
asked Duke Garen.
"You seem lost in thought for a few moments."
"I'm fine, Duke Garen,"
replied Lord DarkStarr.
"I just had a vision of the future."
"Oh, really?"
asked Duke Garen.
"A good one, I hope."
"Indeed it was,"
answered Lord DarkStarr as he smiled.
"Duke Garen, I need your help in locating someone for me. A red-headed female elf named Amber Raine."
Music credits. Soliloquy by Matthew Pablo at www.matthewpablo.com. Viracocha's Demise by Elliot Corley at www.opengameart.org. Rise of Spirit by Alexander Zelenov at https://soundcloud.com/Alexander Zelenov. A Winter Tale by Johann Brod at www.opengameart.org. World Travel by Dan Knoflicek at www.opengameart.org. Flights of Fancy by Elliot Corley at www.opengameart.org. The Fall of Arcana, Epic Game Theme Music by Matthew Pablo at www.matthewpablo.com. Hall of the Ancients by Elliot Corley at www.opengameart.org. Last Minute by Horrorpen at www.opengameart.org. Medieval Theme 1 by Alexander Zelenov at https://soundcloud.com/Alexander Zelenov. Painted Dreams Mockup by Matthew Pablo at www.matthewpablo.com. March of May by Athanasios, Only Kool-Aid, Vasilou, My Canon Sing at www.opengameart.org. Beauty of Chaos by Grindhold and Grindhold.de at www.opengameart.org. Leanne by Illyria from the Illyrian Tales Volume 1 at www.opengameart.org. From Tome to Tome by Elliot Corley from Chaos is Harmony at www.opengameart.org. Asian Duet by Illyria at www.opengameart.org. Asian String Suite by Boss Level VGM at www.opengameart.org. Innocence by Elliot Corley at www.opengameart.org. Maria's Theme by Jan Hanasuanto for Radakan at www.opengameart.org. Dark Amulet by Matthew Pablo at www.matthewpablo.com. Path to Lakeland by Alexander Zelenov at https://soundcloud.com/Alexander Zelenov. Battle Theme A by Cynic Music at www.cynicmusic.com and www.pixelsphere.org. Invasion by Elliot Corley from Chaos is Harmony at www.opengameart.org. Medieval by Miguel Herrero at www.opengameart.org. Almost Out by HorrorPen at www.opengameart.org. Red Curtain by HorrorPen at www.opengameart.org. Enchanted Festival by Matthew Pablo at www.matthewpablo.com. Ireland's Coast Game Edition Live Players by Matthew Pablo at www.matthewpablo.com. Heroism by Edward J. Blakely at www.edwardblakely.com. Conquerors by Alexander Zelenov at https://soundcloud.com/Alexander Zelenov. Tower of Great Lords by Alexander Zelenov at https://soundcloud.com/Alexander Zelenov. Dream Raid Full Version Mockup by Matthew Pablo at www.matthewpablo.com. The King's Crowning by Teleron at www.opengameart.org. Radakan Old Crypt by Jan Hanasuanto for Radakan at www.opengameart.org. Covert Operations by Artistic Dude at www.opengameart.org. Winds of Stories by HorrorPen at www.opengameart.org. The Path Revealed by Elliot Corley at www.opengameart.org. Melvin and Waldorf by Joe Reynolds, Professor Lamp at www.jrtheories.webs.com. Colossal Boss Battle Theme by Matthew Pablo from Blackmore OST at www.matthewpablo.com. El Bosque Encantado by Elliot Corley at www.opengameart.org. Peaceful Village Loop by Illyria from the Illyrian Tales, Volume 1 at www.opengameart.org. Classical Medieval Song by Joe Reynolds, Professor Lamp at www.jrtheories.webs.com. The Last Encounter Original Version by Matthew Pablo at www.matthewpablo.com. Assassin's Assault by HorrorPen at www.opengameart.org. Leap into Eternity Live Orchestra by Matthew Pablo at www.matthewpablo.com. Dream by Elliot Corley at www.opengameart.org. Heroes Theme by Alexander Zelenov at https://soundcloud.com/Alexander Zelenov. Theme of Com Mecca by Matthew Pablo at www.matthewpablo.com. Beyond the Clouds Orchestral Theme by Matthew Pablo at www.matthewpablo.com. Omens by Elliot Corley at www.opengameart.org. The port town of Geral. Marius, the handsome young leader of the Home Guard, suddenly woke up in a cold sweat. Running over to the wash basin, he splashed cold water on his face and stared into the mirror. The face staring back at him was not his own. It was that of the tall albino man. Marius suddenly had a wicked smile on his face and began laughing.